Very good. And Dr. King, would you like to advance to the first slide?
Go.
And I think that all of us think of animal behavior as just being able to watch animals and see what they're doing, but I feel like there's probably a lot more to it. Could you describe the field of animal behavior and why scientists study it?
Yeah, so the study of animal behavior is technically called ethology. And so that's really looking at animal behavior from a really evolutionary perspective. And I also consider myself a behavioral ecologist. And so that is where we look at the evolutionary basis of animal behavior and the ecological pressures. So I find it really fascinating. So from a young child, I've been fascinated about how animals think. And then as I got more involved in conservation and studying wild animals, I think it's also fascinating about how does that affect how they use their habitat. So tying that all together, I think is really interesting to me. And then okay, okay. And then I think there are many reasons to study behavior. I do think that behavior is often undervalued. I think that often we think, I mean, so many people are like, oh, I've had horses all my life. I know about horse behavior, which is a subtly different thing from actually really sitting and watching horses and then recording their behavior scientifically. And I think also management sometimes undervalues the value of watching horse behavior. I think there's a lot of view, it's like, oh, well, they're just doing their thing kind of thing. But I think that there is a lot of value in studying behavior. It helps us understand the adaptive significance of behavior. So really looking at what the social behavior does, how that affects horse populations, both at an individual level and at a population level, I think can be really important. Behavior can inform management. Like if we're seeing that there's really beneficial or detrimental effects of management on the behavior, then that can be really important. And also understanding behavior can be really helpful. Sometimes we can see the effects of management at an individual level, even before we see it at the population level. So there's a lot of like the work on fertility control, and then understanding how it's affecting those individual horses, what the breeding behavior is looking like, can make us be able to predict perhaps what the next foal crop is going to be like. And ultimately, if we understand animals' behavior, then that really gives us this insight into how and when animals are using their habitat. So we can really look at, okay, well, are they, spending all their time in this particular patch of habitat? And so then what should we do? Do we need to put a new water source somewhere else to try and move them around a bit more? So I think that there's many, many reasons to study behavior. And personally, I really enjoy just watching the soap opera of these animals' lives. I think it's endlessly fascinating just seeing how uh, these are sentient beings out on the range, and they're all. It is like watching a soap opera. It's like, oh, she's with him now. Oh my gosh! And it's like, oh, she left him. She's joined someone else, and then I think the more you watch these animals, I think really understanding that soap opera and really seeing it play out is always a lot of fun.
When when you talk about an individual animal and then you talk about a population, I mean, I know it's sort of obvious, but can you talk about the differences in why it might be important to understand an individual behavior and a population behavior and what those differences are?
Yeah, so the population, so in wild horses, generally, when we're talking about a population, we're talking about an individual HMA, herd management area, or maybe even an HMA complex. So a population is where all of the animals could potentially, move across that area, could potentially interbreed with each other. And most management really happens at a population level. I
Mhm.
think that's the unit which is most cared about. It's like how many individuals are in that population. So whether they're an endangered species like the Przewalski's horse, where we want that population to grow, or with wild horses where we're concerned that maybe there's too many. So that's really looking at it at the population level. But the population is, of course, made up of individuals. And so, by taking a sample, by looking at a number of the individuals in the population, then we can make inferences about the population as a whole. And so I think I really enjoy individual-based research where you really get to know the animals at that individual level. But then you need to know all of the animals so that you can say, well, this is what's happening at this population overall. I think if we just look at like one or two horses out of a population of, 300, then we can't really say that those individuals are uh, what's the word I'm looking for? We can't really say that those individuals are representative of the whole population. But then if we can look at a large number of individuals within a population, or even look at most of the individuals within a population, then we can really say like, oh yeah, this individual behavior is what this whole population is doing. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. And so this kind of leads into the next thing that we're going to talk about, and that is how is behavior measured?
Yeah. So so basically, yeah, often we have really long field days. So a lot of the work that I was involved with, we had radio collars on the horses, and or at least on some of the horses. And so the radio collars allowed us to find them, or in theory, it allowed us to find them. Often the radio collars led us to the area near where they were, and then we would often have to then go out on foot and then try and find them from there. And then there are various ways of measuring behavior. So scan sampling, which we used a lot, is where you record a behavior every so often. And so we were recording behavior like what the group was doing. So in terms of like, were they standing, were they feeding, were they moving, every 10 minutes over an hour. And then you can also have focal animal sampling, which we didn't do, but is done in a lot of like primate studies and in zoo studies. And that's where you literally record like every single thing that the animal is doing throughout your observation period. The other sampling that we used that I really like to record some of these behaviors that are really quite rare, like like aggressive interactions or something like that, is all occurrence sampling. And that's where you just record every time something happens during that sampling time. And then obviously we can use radio collars so that we know where animals have been, even when we're not looking at them. And radio collars are getting more and more advanced with the GPS technology and the satellite technology. And there's more and more information that we can get from radio collars, including this accelerometer data. So then we know whether their heads are up or down. And then even there's more and more that you can get from that. And even now there's collars. There was a really cool study. They put a camera on a collar of an Asiatic wild ass. And so then really they could look at, who it was with. There's other technology I'd love to use where the collars know when they're in close proximity to other collars. So then you can really get at social behavior with that. But yeah, a typical field day, we would leave the trailer early in the morning, and then basically, yeah, it's a lot less glamorous than it sounds. We would often have like long days just driving around trying to listen for a beep from a receiver, and then when we hear that beep, we'd then get out and then try and find those horses. And then, yeah, a certain amount of hiking, and then we'd try and stay with them for an hour, and we would work in pairs. So we would have one person who would be writing down the data, and the other person who would be doing the watching and sort of reading out what the horses were doing. But yeah, this means that then we would collect a lot of data. So for my thesis that I did on Przewalski's horses, so over about I think it was about 16 months, I collected like more than 800 hours of observations.
Oh my God.
And then on the studies we had like 4 years of observations with a field crew, and we collected about 2,000 hours of observations at one of the horse field sites. And
Good.
so collecting this, so it's not just it. With behavior data, you need to have a lot of observation hours so that you have enough data on some of these really rare behaviors that you can actually do statistical analysis on them. And I think that that's something that often, I think that that's why behavior work is so time consuming,
Mhm.
because you need to have a lot of hours of observation so that if something happens a few times, you know that it's more than chance. And so often the horses, it's like they would be really active and there would be like, fights or mating or something exciting going on. We would get all set up, start the hour, they would just put their heads down and graze. Then they would graze for that entire hour, maybe with a bit of resting in there. Then the clock would end, and then they would do something exciting again. And it's like, come on, we didn't capture that in our data. Um, but then having those 2000 hours meant that we collected enough of that, of those exciting events. And so, yeah, so it takes a lot of time to collect enough data. And yeah, as I'm sure most people on this Zoom know, the horses spend most of their time just standing around or eating. So you need to have a lot of time to collect those, to be able to make statistical inferences from the behaviors that are a bit more rare.
And so, what are the social systems that ancestors of today's wild horses and burros followed? And do our modern wild horses and burros follow that same system?
Yeah, so we have the ancestor of the burro is the African wild ass, which is only found in the Horn of Africa. These are extremely endangered animals. There's only about 600 of them left in the wild. I mean, they are critically endangered. So they really need our help. Przewalski's horses, there's a few more. There's about 1,000 in the wild. But these wild ancestors, yeah, are a lot more rare than our wild horses and donkeys. So yes, we know that the African wild ass is the ancestor of the donkey or the burro, and then Przewalski's horses are kind of like a sister species to the domestic horse. Then yeah, they're not directly descended, but they have a common ancestor.
Mm.
And so we know that that the social structure of these species really depends on the resources available. So the movements of the females are determined by the resources. So when resources are widely spread and fairly abundant, so like grasslands, so like the plains or the Great Basin, then the females are just moving around pretty much all together because even so a lactating mare has similar energetic needs to a non-lactating mare or a mare that's pregnant. And the males, obviously, they want to be wherever the females are. So with horses, they're going to have this female defense system where the males then they stick with a group of females, they form those social bonds, and then they move around as a unit. But with something like donkeys or the African wild ass, so burros, they evolved in areas that are extremely arid. And so like, I mean, true, extremely harsh desert where water sources are really spread really far apart and the water source might be really far from the good grazing. So then you'll have a lactating, a nursing Jenny or a nursing female, and she needs to come and drink every day. But then a female that doesn't have a foal that year, she doesn't need to come and drink every day. They'll only drink about every 3 or 4 days. So she can be like, well, I'm just going to hang out where the good grass is because I don't need to be coming back and forth. So then those females don't really stick together. And so they have this fission fusion social system that they go together and come apart. And so then the males can't really, they'd be like, well, which female do I want to be with? And so the males hang out near a resource such as a water source, and then they might have a territory there, and then they will just mate with the females as they come in. So then this we call a resource defense social system. And so horses and donkeys do have this very different social system, which is then shown like in their social groups. So yeah, so these are the horses. So the males are in these yellow squares and the females are in the blue circles. And you can really see, so the same time. So Congo is a herd management area in Western Utah, and Sinbad has burrows on it, and that's in central Utah. And you can see how different their social system is.
Mm.
And horse females are almost always associated with a male. And typically it's just one male, but sometimes more than one male. Whereas it was really common for us to see the burro jennies just off on their own or just with another female and not necessarily with males at all. So yeah, so they have very different social systems.
Oh. And so are burros just smaller horses?
No, so they're very different. And I think that I think so often they're treated like they're just small horses, but they're completely different species. So they're separated by something like 2 million years of evolution. So their ancestors diverged 2 million years ago. So they've had a very different evolutionary path. They have a different evolutionary history. So the burros, so the African wild ass evolved in like North Africa, where it was extremely arid, whereas the horse ancestors evolved in like Eurasia, where you had these like endless grasslands. So that means that they've, yeah, evolved these completely different social systems, and then they do have slightly different behaviors that we'll talk about a bit more as we go through this.
Um, and male and female horses associate differently and have different roles. When we think of males, we sort of typically think of stallions and bachelors. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so stallions and bachelors, I think, is the main the yeah, sort of the two main classes of males. What we found in one of our studies is that there's four different adult male statuses. So there's bachelors, which are males that just hang out with other males. And I think they have a pretty good life. They just hang out doing boy stuff, and then they just they just sort of do their thing, and they hang out together. And some males just stay as bachelors. Not every male makes it to a harem stallion. But then we have harem stallions. So in this picture, that's this guy in the middle. And so these are the males who have that close association with the females. They were the ones that doing most of the breeding. We would see them like really interacting with the females, and the females choosing to be close to those males. Then in some groups, we would also have a second male that we called a lieutenant. And so then this is a male who would sometimes be part of the group and would stick really very close to the group and definitely be, have social bonds in there, and either with the harem stallion and also with the mares. But then we also saw males that we called tags. And so these are males that would just sort of float around. So bachelor stallions that would hang out near a harem, and so they would follow it around. I mean, sometimes for a long time, like for a month or more, but they would never really be part of the group, and they would never they didn't really like socially interact a lot with the other horses, but they would just sort of float along nearby. And yeah, so these were generally bachelors, and it's like I think that they were like, hey, I just want to be near women. And then that was sort of what they could do. And in the literature, there's different names. I mean, we called these lieutenants and tags, because in the literature it wasn't very clear. Sometimes they were called subordinate stallions, sometimes they were called satellite stallions, and it wasn't clear like what they were referring to exactly. Which if that was referring to lieutenants or tags or both, because in our observation they had very different roles.
Hmm.
And there's a variety of hypotheses about what might benefit these stallions. Is it that they have access to females? Do they have protection of the other stallion? Are they gaining experience? And yeah, it was really hard for us to find out how it benefited the males to have these other roles.
That's interesting. So what do horses do all day? And do males and females do similar things?
Yeah, so in the literature, yeah, so this is wild horse time budget from the literature. So the time budget is how they budget out their time through the day. So generally we're looking at percent of their time or percent of the time that they're observed that we see them doing the different things. And yeah, and so in the literature, they spend about 60% of their time grazing and about 10% of their time moving. And then they spend the rest of their time. So the difference between stand resting and standing. So stand resting is when they really lock that hind leg into position, and then their ears kind of flop sideways and their eyes droop. And so they're very specific. Oh, that's what I meant to say. With the like, how do we measure behavior? Is that we have an ethogram. So an ethogram is a list of behaviors that have really distinct descriptions about what each of those behaviors are. So, like with stand resting, the criteria for a horse to be called stand resting is that it has that locked hind leg, the ears flopping, the eyelids drooping, the head drooping. And if it doesn't have those things, then it will be called standing. In our studies, so we've got horses at the top in that blue line, the blue whatever, the blue title, and then these two burro populations. So Lake Pleasant is in central Arizona, just outside of Phoenix. And we were really surprised that we saw much less grazing than in the literature. And so we saw about 25% of the time grazing. Burros spent a bit more time grazing.
Hmm.
So yeah, but yeah, they spent a lot of time standing and just sort of hanging out. And it could be we did have this fair amount of time that they were out of sight, and it's very likely that most of that time that they were actually grazing. But this was when a horse was like behind a bush or just over the top of a hill or something like that. So we knew the horse was still there, but we couldn't see exactly what they were doing. And so I suspect that most of this out of sight that the horses were just grazing. And then the males and females, there we go. And so this shows their time budget during the day. And so we've got the females are in the pale gray and males are in the dark gray. And again, we've got horses with the blue outline and the two others are burros. And yeah, and so this also shows the difference with the donkeys and the horses. So donkeys spent a lot more time feeding, moving, and lying down, especially lying down than horses did.
Mhm.
Like the donkeys, it's really common to see them just like lying down. And in the summer, they would use their tails to like beat up dust. And they would make these little like dust patches to get rid of flies. And we never saw horses do that. But horses did spend more time standing than donkeys did. And in horses, the females spent more time feeding than the males, but the males spent more time moving than the females did.
Interesting. And so, did you all hypothesize why donkeys were spending more time grazing, or were you just observations and not necessarily digging into the whys?
Yeah, I mean, we always want to sort of hypothesize and also think about, why are we seeing these differences? Is it just an artifact? Um, I think and obviously all of these things are like mutually exclusive. Like a horse, like because of this ethogram, a horse can't be feeding and standing at the same time.
Hmm.
And so it can't be like standing and moving at the same time kind of thing. So yeah, so I think I mean the differences were significantly different, but but yeah, I don't know. I don't know why they spent more time feeding. I mean, it could just be that that's what burrows need to do. And again, this evolutionary uh, reason behind it. I think the lying down is definitely something which burrows do that is very different to horses.
Hmm.
And I don't know if it's that they're smaller bodied, so it's easier for them to just lie down, and then because they've got their different tail structure to then be beating up the dust. Whereas for horses I mean, not that donkeys can't also stand rest, but then it's probably easier for horses just to put in that put their leg into that locked position and then do the standing. Um, but yeah, why donkeys would feed more? It could also be that they, with the horses, that they're maybe the typically if animals are feeding more, it's often because what they're eating is of a lower value, a low nutritional value. So it could be that the horses in those HMAs, well, at Congo, were able to find more nutritious vegetation, so they didn't need to spend as much time feeding.
Hmm. And were there any recorded behaviors that you all found that were surprising?
Oh, I put that at the end.
Oh, is that at
Um,
the end? We can
yeah.
we can we can wait.
Okay.
So let's cover some of these.
Oh no, I did put it here. Were
Oh,
there
you
any
did put
behaviors
it
that were
there.
surprising?
All right, what
Okay.
was surprising?
Okay. Cool. Okay. Now I'm surprised. Okay. Yeah, so I think that what I put for this side, so we also looked at geldings. So at Congo, so we castrated like 40% of the adult males. And what really surprised me was how little effect it had on male behavior.
Hmm.
And so we found no effect of gelding on their time budgets. And we also found almost no effect on their agonistic, so how aggressive they were, or on their reproductive behavior. So so we gelded horses across all sorts of different ages. Um, and then we knew their status. We had a year of pre-gelding observation. So we knew their status at the time of gelding. And males that we gelded as harem stallions pretty much carried on behaving like harem stallions. And a lot of these males, so you can see in the black bars, so these are the gelded males, and they carried on wanting to associate with females. And it interested me that the females didn't. I was expecting that we would put these males back out and the females would be like, ew, no.
Mm-hmm.
But the females also carried on, continued to want to be with these males. But when they were gelded as bachelors, then they pretty much remained as bachelors. Whereas other males, so the intact males who were not gelded of the same cohort, they pretty much all became harem stallions. So yeah, so I think that really surprised me because we've used gelding as a way of controlling males for millennia. So I was expecting it to have a lot more impact
Mm-hmm.
on their behavior. And this is one of those studies that everyone's like, well, duh, you know what's going to happen. They're just going to completely lose all interest in females and just hang out near the water sources or near the good grass. And they didn't. They carried on acting like harem stallions. So I thought that was fascinating.
Mm-hmm. And so let's get back to how we categorize some of these behaviors and describe them. And so what are agnostic behavior? Agonistic behaviors, not agnostic. That's something totally
Yes,
different.
it is. It is. Yes. To my knowledge, the horses are not very religious. So um, yeah, so agonistic behaviors. So these can be relatively subtle. So this mare in the top picture is showing a bite threat. And so the ears are back and she's sort of ready to bite. This stallion on the bottom, so this is a Przewalski's horse. So this is herding. And so you can see it's a slightly different stance. When the animals are moving, it really is apparent the difference because a herding stallion, anyone who's seen it, you can't mistake it for anything else. Because that's when the males put their head down and they almost like snake their head. And yeah, it's a really distinct behavior. But we had a whole list, so this is part of our etogram. So each of these had a distinct description of the behavior, yeah, which is in this paper that's cited above. And yeah, if anyone wants any copies of any of the behaviors that I cite in this, please email me. And if ever, in general, this is just a plug for science. So we as scientists, we do not get paid for publishing papers. And so what we only get sort of the glory of it being cited. So if ever you want a paper from a scientist, email the author of the paper and say, hey, could you send me a PDF? Almost always they will be very happy to do so, and there's absolutely no charge. So that's this is something which I found out a lot of people don't know, and I think it's really important. But yeah, so if ever you want a copy of a paper, email the person who wrote it, and they will be really glad to share their research with you. So these agonistic behaviors, so we have bump push. That's typically when a horse like throws their shoulder or their chest into another horse. So biting, kicking, I think everyone's familiar with. So chasing is when it's like that like going to bite and then really like running after the other horse. Then rearing, which is up on the back legs. Striking is kicking out with the front foot. Boxing is, yeah, many famous pictures of stallions both up on their hind legs with their front feet at each other. The arch neck threat, I don't think I have in this. Oh, I think there's a photo. Oh, actually, this previous photo, this is a bit of an arch neck threat. And so it's where the stallions are really like, it's really when they make themselves look super beautiful just by like arching their neck. And then often they'll do this in the parallel walk that you see the stallions just sort of walking next to each other and they're both just sort of posturing. And then herding, yeah, is this picture on the bottom. So yeah.
And then what are affiliative behaviors?
So affiliative behaviors are the friendly behaviors.
Mhm.
And so this is things like play, like these two youngsters are doing. These are Przewalski's horses again. But also things like mutual grooming. So mutual grooming is when you see the horses and they both sort of are nibbling, nuzzling at each other. In horses, it's extremely rare for this to be non-reciprocal, which can also be called allogrooming. So in primates, it's very common for one to do it another and for that not to be responded. But in horses, they almost always do it to each other. It's very rare that they don't. We also recorded touches, so that can look, as overt as like laying the head on your friend, but also it can be a lot more subtle. And I think there's a lot going on in touches, And it means that I think that it's really underreported. And I think that we as humans tend to really focus on the agonistic behaviors. We're really like, oh, well, dominance and aggression, and that's what makes the really dramatic photos. But in fact, what binds horse society together, what's really important, is these affiliative behaviors. And so it's all of these like little touches. It's simply being close to another horse and also just playing together. And so both of these pictures are of stallions playing.
Mhm.
And I think that yeah, so in this Przewalski's horse picture, so this guy here, I don't know if you can see my mouse. So the stallion, anyway, the stallion kind of closest to us that's rearing.
Mhm.
So he's a harem stallion, and all the rest of these guys are bachelors.
Mhm.
And we'd see this often in like, well, Przewalski's horses, but with wild horses, that we'd see the stallion like leave his mares, a harem stallion, leave mares and like run off towards a herd of towards a group of bachelors. It's like, oh, there's going to be a really big fight. And then they would get together and they would just all play together. And I think I think that the harems, I mean, they all know each other. They all know each other's relative strengths. This is a way that they assess that. And that's how they, I think, the males maintain their social bonds by just coming together and playing sometimes. And so I think play is really important, and like touches are really important to horses. And I think it's really yeah, with some other colleagues we're hoping to do another study really looking at touches and what the different touches mean and the context of the touches. Because I think it's about time we spent more attention on the affiliative behavior of horses and less on the agonistic.
And what are reproductive behaviors?
Yeah,
That's
so
not,
so
there's an
this is
obvious
a
one.
this is a really obvious one, yes. But it can be things just as simply as like the males and females like sniffing noses, the genital sniffing. So phlegm, which is where you see that lip curl, that's often a male like pulling out hormones or information from urine. Then obviously we have mounting and copulation. Something that we never saw, but which has been reported, is forced copulation. So humans, that's rape. And then the other thing that we have is masturbation. And so this is an African wild ass at Denver Zoo who is demonstrating this with his fifth leg. Um, and yeah, and we found that masturbation was related to the frequency of reproductive behaviors, but it wasn't necessarily related to reproductive success. And yeah, and all of the males did it. And so we think it's just a byproduct of sexual arousal. I think they're often standing around having happy dreams. So yeah.
And so horses whinny and donkeys and burros bray, but what else?
Yeah, so this is my, let's see if I can get this video to work. This is my Bray video. Well, it's not my Bray video, but there we go. Just to wake everyone up if everyone is was beginning to drop off in this presentation. Um, so yeah, so donkeys had some very distinct. So I'll start at the bottom of this list. So donkeys had some very distinct vocalizations. There'd be the bray. We'd also hear things like growls and grunts from burros as well. And so yeah, they had quite a range of vocalizations. Both species would do this wooffle, which is that blubbery sound made with the lips. And the wooffle, I think there was a lovely study on domestic horses that showed that this was associated generally with positive emotions. So domestic horses do this more like in their pasture than in the stall, and especially when their ears are forward or sideways. And if they were stressed, they tended to wooffle less. And I've noticed that woofles are also often contagious. Like one horse will do it, and then another horse will do it. And so it's a really lovely sound. And it's a different sound from this, like the blow or the snort. And so the blow is almost like has like a high pitchness to it. That's like when the horse really like stands up and, like that, you hear that alarm snort. And then there's squeals and screams and nickers, and then yeah, and then the whinny, the neigh was only done by horses. And there was some really cool recent research that found that it was actually kind of a cross between a whistle and a snort. It's something that's really quite unique to horses and their physiology to be able to do this. So yeah, that's. wide range of equalization.
And do only harem stallions reproduce?
Sorry. Um, yeah. So so this table shows so we've got the male here, so we've got these different statuses of male. And then this is looking at all of the foals that were born at these two HMAs. So they're both in Utah, Conga and Frisco. And then we could record whether the dam harm stallion, so the harm stallion that mare was associated with, was the father of the foal. So this is using genetics. And then we could also look at whether a different harm stallion was the sire or whether it was any of these other males.
Hmm.
And so then also we had these single male harem stallions, so it was only him. And then we had multi-male harem stallions, which are the males, the harem stallions who were then associated with lieutenants and tags. And so if we look in this, so above this orange box, so all of these, so you can see that mostly the mares were like socially socially faithful to their harem stallion. But then there were these other ones where they weren't. And so even when the mare chose another harem stallion to be the father of their foal, um, it was still just a single male harem stallion. So they really didn't like these multi-male harem stallions so much. And these lieutenants and tags who would just hang out and really stay with a harem, they had fewer foals even than just a bachelor who wasn't even close to the harem. So I think this is really showing that the females are really choosing who they want to have their foal with. It's not just whoever's closest or yeah. And then that's also shown by this slide that yeah, so it was amazing. There was this really strong, we call it reproductive skew. So
Mhm.
very few males are responsible for most of the foals. So we had 9% of 117 males across two different HMAs produced almost half of the foals. And so
Wow.
I think this is really quite mind-blowing. And almost all of these paternities, so 88% of paternities were by these single male harem stallions. And so the mares were definitely showing their preference for just the males being by themselves. And then although we did have some of these extra group copulations or like these sneak matings where
Mhm.
either another male would come in or the mare would be like, hey, with
Mhm.
a male who wasn't their harem stallion. The mares still, they might have the foal, like the other stallion might be the father of the foal, but then they would come back to their social group and have the foal in their own social group. So yeah, I think there's a lot more female choice. We tend to focus on the stallions and oh yeah, the stallions are going to get the mare,
Mhm.
but the mares are really choosing who they want to have their foals.
And who do they prefer to choose?
So this dun stallion, who unfortunately this isn't the best picture of him. It's the best one I could find right now. This guy we called Mr. Handsome.
Mhm.
He was like a supermodel of stallions at Conga, and I thought he was a super handsome horse. The mares also thought he was a super handsome horse. This guy alone was responsible for a really high proportion of all the foals born on Congo. He had the largest harem. I think that he had something like 13 mares at one point. And
Mhm.
so, or maybe it was 13 mares and offspring. But anyway, he had like the largest harem and consistently had it. And he was just the single male stallion. So it's hard to know. I think that's a whole other study. It's like, what are the mares looking for in these
Mhm.
males? I think all that we could tell from our data was that they are preferring males that are just by themselves, that don't have other males hanging out with them. But otherwise, yeah, it's hard to know what they're looking for. Dominance, I think, is a little bit of a I think that's a very blurry subject. I think again, we as humans like to focus on agonistic behaviors, and we also like to think of this like strict dominance hierarchy and the stallion being dominant. But this is data from my PhD thesis, and so these arrows are showing where who was agonistic to who kind of thing. So you can see that stallions, like 52% of the time, they were showing agonistic behaviors towards mares. But mares would also they would go back against the stallion. And
Mhm.
most of the aggression was like mares to other mares. So I think that I think dominance is so much in domestic horses. It's really based on resources. So, and I think it's true in wild populations as well. It's really about who cares most about resources at that point in time.
Mhm.
And so it's not that there's always like this linear hierarchy that A is always dominant over B over who's dominant over C. I think that things often you'll see triangles in there, or in some contexts, this one might be more dominant and or like by shoving the other one off the resources, but in another context, this other one might be. So I think dominance is a very tricky thing, and I think is more of a human construct than what we really see out there.
And so, as a final sort of big picture question, what are the big picture findings from your most recent research?
So for me, I think the real take home message I want people to have is how much female choice there is in these societies. So especially when I was doing my thesis work, more than 20 years ago at this point, like all of the literature was about yeah, it was about the stallions and and the stallion steals mares and then the stallion like maintains the mares and like even the terminology, that we have this female defense polygyny, that it's the stallion who is like defending the mares from other males. But what this research on reproduction showed was that the females have so much choice. And so often, and it's like, yeah, sure, we would see stallion turnover, we would see stallions who would then have a fight, and then the mares go with the other stallion, or stallions would herd mares away. But ultimately, we if the mare doesn't want to stay with that stallion, she won't. She will just go back. And in all of this space that they have, there's not a. It's really hard work for the stallion to try and keep her with him. And then also the we would just see females just change group for often I think if they're not getting pregnant, I think that they're like okay, I'm gonna go find someone who'll get me pregnant instead. They do have some kind of internal mechanism where they know whether they're pregnant or not. But I think yeah, I think that the mare stories, it's like they're often less dramatic than the stallions.
Mhm.
But I think the understanding, how much female choice the mares have, and yeah, and how they're really choosing stallions. Oh, that was the slide I meant to put in. They're choosing stallions based on these affiliative bonds. So
Mhm.
that's also what we found is that the stallions who are more aggressive, the females don't really stay with those. It's like it doesn't help the stallion stay longer as a harem stallion, and it doesn't help him get more foals. But the stallions who had more affiliative interactions with their mares, so more of the mutual grooming, those touches, and staying in close proximity, those stallions stayed as harem stallions for longer, and they had more foals overall. And so that Mr. Handsome stallion, so yeah, he was obviously just very good at being very nice to his mares. And so the mares choose to hang out with him, which helped him then have a lot of foals.
It's a good life lesson.
Yeah, yeah, be nice to your women. Yeah.
Um, well, thank you very, very much. I want to make sure that we have some time because Dr. King actually has a meeting at the top of the hour, so she has a definite hard exit at that time. So we can have a little time for question and answer. And the way that we handle this we have a larger group than usual at our webinars, which is fantastic, and I'm really grateful and excited that everybody came. We're starting to gauge what is more interesting to people when we do these webinars. And definitely horse behavior, I would say, is at the top of the list. Um, if you are someone who likes to have your camera on, and sort of participate in that way, you are welcome to turn your camera on. Please keep yourself muted. And if you know how to use the raise hand feature, if you'd like to raise your hand, I will call on people and they can ask questions. I'm going to attempt to try to figure out how to turn the chat back on. And so if you don't like being on camera and you don't want to ask your question, um, you can go ahead and type it into the chat and I can make sure that Dr. King sees it. I'll follow along with that. It'll take me just a second to figure it out.
Okay, and
Advocacy.
also I'm going to put a link to my yeah, so as I said, I have this training business. I'm going to put a link to that in the chat,
Oh,
and
great.
that has like all of my research at this link, so all of my papers, and also yeah, you can find out ways about contacting me through that link as well.
Okay. Okay. I believe the chat is working. So you're welcome to. Oh, yes, because Dr. King just put her link
Yeah,
in. Um, okay. So I hope that's clear to everybody. If not, you can chat that you are confused and I will explain it again. Um, but again, thank you. And if anyone has to exit at any time, just our our grateful thanks to you for being here. I will do a little bit of a um, I'll put up a screen at the end of this question and answer so you all can see how to get some more information. But if Dr. King has to leave, she can jump off as well. We'll wrap up with
cool.
whoever can stay. But I just wanted to thank everybody before we roll into this. So,
Yeah,
and I'm
thank you for
sorry.
coming.
Yes. And I'm sorry, the first person with their hand up, I do not know how to pronounce your name. Is it Ayub?
That's about right. Yeah, I'll take that. Thank you.
Well, you can correct me also.
Ayub. It's pronounced Ayub, but honestly, it was close enough.
Okay, Ayub. Well, thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for this the presentation. It's been really interesting. A lot of sort of like commonalities between horses and people looking at this. My question is, so with the Huanacos, I remember seeing this somewhere, but Huanaco, like the herds, they have this sort of like hygiene system. So they actually have like designated sort of like spots where they excrete and urinate or sort of poop in. Has that been observed with wild burros or horses, or is that not really sort of?
No, not really. With the exception that males have these things called stud piles, which are like dung piles, and males will they have this very ritualized way that they will deposit dung in on a dung pile where other males have dunged. And this is not it's not territorial. So I looked at this as part of my PhD thesis, and so it wasn't that it's like around the edge of a like a home range or a territory or anything, but it did tend to be at places that the horses traveled a lot. So it would often be by water sources on like saddles, like where a path went over a ridge, places like that. And I think it's a way that the males are all really familiar with each other, and know who's come past. So it's kind of like a signpost of like, hey, I came through here. And then, so then if there's like a little young male, he'd be like, oh, well, I'm not going to go that way then. And then, or they just know who else is around.
Oh, so
So,
it's like
but yeah,
set marking. Yeah,
so we don't really see the like a latrine in any equid.
Interesting.
interesting.
And
Thank
they also
you.
have different, I mean, the guanacos, llamas, the camelids, they have more of that fission fusion social system. They have a different social system to definitely to horses.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Give people a second. As
I
a rem oh,
sorry, I have a couple of questions, but neither my chat or I cannot find the hand raise button either.
well then go
So
for
I
it.
apologize. So I am an anthozoologist, or at least in a semester, I will officially have my master's in science and anthozoology. And I actually had a couple of questions, if you don't mind. So in anthozoology, we study animal behavior and the impact of human behavior on animal behavior. And one of the things that came to mind almost immediately for me is, have you witnessed a change in behavior amongst wild herds where there is a heavier presence of anthropogenic disturbances? So roads, highways, tourists. And then the other part of that question is have you witnessed and a change in wild horse behavior following a roundup? Like, how do they like leave an area for a while before coming back? How long does it take them to kind of reestablish their hierarchy? Things of that nature.
Yeah, so to answer the second question first, after gather, so Yeah, so especially as I said, we did this study, we looked at gelding, and so we were able to, so the BLM did a gather, we took the horses off, and then we put all the horses back on. And in that gather, we were careful to, or the BLM again was careful to try and, we really wanted to have like whole social groups together, so that we could keep them together so we wouldn't affect the study. But then, yeah, we saw that they did all, yeah, it really didn't affect the social structure at all. It didn't affect where the horses moved. And then we did do other, yeah. And then when we've looked at it, I mean, the horses do tend to find each other again. So, I mean, there might be a gather, there might be removals. And then because all of these animals are covering the landscape, we didn't see any like shift of avoiding areas. So they did tend to find each other again. I think they remember, they know each other. And so yeah, they would try and find each other. And even we went out like before we even started our study and took photos, and so we could see even that some of those horses were still together even after I think like a load of horses got taken off.
Mm.
And then the question about difference in behavior where there's more anthropogenic activity. Yeah, that's something which I think has not been expressly examined. That's a question that I have as well. I'm interested if there's yeah, a difference in flight distance of horses. At Congo, the populations that we studied, so anecdotally, I think where there's more human pressure, the horses tend to be a lot more calm, or they have less of a flight distance from people.
Mhm.
I think they get habituated to the presence of people. So I think a lot of these populations we have these really great photos from are because the people can get so close to the horses, or at least the vehicles can get close to the horses. I think in populations where there's less human presence, the horses tend to have a much longer flight distance and will go from further away. But that is just anecdotal. So
Right. Yeah, and have you like compared and contrasted wild horse behavior with domestic horses who are in a herd environment? Like for me, example, I've got 5 horses and I can see some correlate, and one of them is a wild Mustang. I definitely can see differences in her behavior and others, but I can also see a lot of similarities between my herd's behavior and wild horse herd's behavior. And then have you compared wild horse behavior as they're out on the range with wild horses who have been rounded up and then tamed and then brought into a domesticated environment?
Short answer is no, I have not done that. I would love to do that research. I also really want to do research on Przewalski's horse behavior against domestic horse behavior. Because I think that with all of these different statuses, the differences are subtle, but I think they will be present. I think the biggest difference between horses on the range and horses in like under human care is space. I think that even if we have like what we consider a really large pasture, so even like a 40-acre pasture, let's say, it's still limited to 40 acres. And so I think that then we still will see, so I think that, so studies like of horses in zoos, most of the studies of horses in domestic environments show way more aggression than what we found on the wild horses and what I found in Przewalski's horses as well. And with the Przewalski's horses, it was really stunning because all of the previous research had been done on horses in zoos, and they were like, oh, Przewalski's horses are so aggressive. And then I was watching them where they had, infinite space, potentially, and the amount of aggression was so much lower. Because
Yeah.
in a wild system, they can just leave. If someone's being an asshole, they'll just be like, "Yeah, I'm going to go find a different route."
Absolutely.
And whereas when we have them under human care, they don't have that option. And they also generally have limited resources. So they have like, certain number of hay feeders, certain number of water holes. So I think that's why we see those differences.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Dr. King.
Good. Congratulations on your master's thesis.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
that's really cool. I am looking at the time, and Dr. King actually has to jump to another meeting. I'll stay on because I'm just going to make sure that everyone here knows how to contact Dr. King or can contact me if you want any follow-up information. But first and foremost, thank you so much. I think this was really fascinating and very thought-provoking. That sometimes we think a lot of things, but a little bit of a closer look might change our minds a little bit. So thank you very,
Absolutely.
very much.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for this opportunity. Bye, everyone.
And if anyone would like to stick around, I'm going to put my email in the chat. Hang on, I can't do two things at once. And any or all of you are welcome to email me, and I can definitely hook you up with Dr. King if you have questions for her. I'll put you all in contact. And just as a final, I'm going to share with you all a few things that are going on at Return to Freedom that we would love your help and support or interest if you have it. This year in the 2027 President's budget, the language does not, for the budget for the Bureau of Land Management's Wild Horse and Burro program, does not include the protective language that is usually in the President's budget, which essentially says that the budget dollars handed to the BLM for management of wild horses and burros will not be used to kill healthy wild horses and burros, essentially taking that management option off the table. Congress does that every year. So we are watching that, and we are definitely having conversations with congressional members to impart that that is still very important to people. We're also continuing in every direction with encouraging that fertility control usage be increased so that it becomes an actual real part of management options and isn't sort of an afterthought, and can lead towards decreasing both the number of gathers that are considered necessary and the number of horses that are gathered when they do probably inconceivably happen. We also are pursuing, as usual, and as we have since the founding of Return to Freedom, the SAFE Act, which stands for the Save America's Forgotten Equines Act. And this would ban slaughter so that United States horses, whether wild or domestic, could not be shipped across borders to go to slaughter. So it would eliminate that option. And finally, if you're interested in our Wild Horse Defense Fund, which helps pay for our grassroots advocacy efforts and pretty selective but occasional litigation that we're involved in, that fund could always use a little bit of assistance. All of this information is on our website, and also letters or drafts of letters that you could use to write to your congressional members, because if you participated in our informed advocacy webinar about a month ago, we did talk about how grassroots advocacy can be effective and the most effective parts of that advocacy. And a lot of that is you all beating the streets and reaching out to your congressional representatives. So anyway, that is available on our website. But finally, we are just really, really grateful for your participation in these webinars and for your curiosity. We're going to be developing the webinar series for sort of through the summer and beyond. We would love your ideas. You can send them to me at the email listed there in the chat, science@returntofreedom.org. And again, we are really, really grateful to all of you who make our work possible. So thank you very much, and we hope to see you at any and all webinars in the future. Thanks so much, everybody.